Hello everybody, welcome back to another Helldivers 2 video, because as I mentioned, I want to do more of these on the channel going forward, and also just had some pet troubles today, so we're doing an easy video, just so I get one out at a reasonable time, and we're covering one of perhaps the more slept-on mechanics, or ones that people often forget about. It would be armor passives. Every armor set has one, and there's 13 of them in the game at the moment. I'm sure there's going to be more in the future. But this is all the ones that are in currently as of the Omens of Tyranny update. If maybe in a few battle war bonds we'll have more to cover, and I'll update the list, but let's get on to it. First up, extra padding. So this is your basic ability. You usually see this on medium armors. I think there's a few light armors as well. Basically increases your just basic armor rating. It gives your basic armor, your B29, I think it's called, your default armor, technically means it's as protective as heavy armor, with none of the downsides of heavy armor. And in my opinion, I think extra padding's great. It's just very simple, take all comers, you just take less damage. I particularly like it on medium armor, just because, again, then you have effective heavy armor with none of the downsides. And if you don't really need the benefits of another armor passive, it's very good. There is only one heavy armor, though of course that does mean that heavy armor is the highest armor rating in the game at 200, which I think equates to about 65% general damage reduction, which is huge. Moving on, we have Scout. Scout is fantastic. It makes it harder for enemies to detect you, no matter what you're doing, which is just fantastic. It allows you to run past patrols a lot easier. And it makes your pings larger, which is useful to scout out enemies, find locations, big enemy units. And also it makes your passive ping just larger, which is very good. And this is, of course, there's a few medium armors, but this is, of course, mainly on 3 of the light armors, Arctic Ranger, Trailblazer, and I can't remember the name of it. It's not Marksman, that's the heavy armor. I think it's just called Scout. Anyways, the Scout armor. This, in my opinion, is easily one of the best armor passives you can have, just because you will be surprised how much that 30% reduced detection range is, especially when you're prone. You can walk like just a few feet in front of something like a Hulk, and it just won't notice you. It's really useful, especially when you're trying to destroy a stratagem jammer or something like that. This with the jump pack lets you jump up, take out a couple enemies, and then just lay low, and you probably won't have to deal with anything else, which is very useful. Love Scout, definitely one of my favorites, if not my outright favorite armor passive in the game. Next we have Fortified. So what Fortified does is gives you 30% reduced recoil on your weapons. So very useful if you're using something unwieldy like the HMG, one of my favorite weapons, or just a weapon with naturally high recoil like I can't remember the name of it, but it's the SMG from Truth Enforcers. Sorry, couldn't remember the name of it. Basically the UMP 45. And it also gives you 50% reduced explosion damage, which is very handy, because Helldivers innately take 50% less explosion damage, so if you get caught in the blast of something, you're not likely to die. You can tank a lot of explosives with this. You have to be wary. You'll still get sent flying, which means if you go flying off a cliff, there's still a good chance you'll die from the fall. But this does make you significantly more survivable against things like armored striders, which can be sneakily some of the most deadly units in the game. So being able to withstand one of those rockets and also be significantly easier to keep heavy weapons on target. I personally quite like Fortified. Some people might disagree. Personally, I like Fortified because I tend to like weapons with relatively high recoil. Things like, again, as I mentioned, the HMG. The Adjudicator is the name of that SMG. Even though my main primary is the Tenderizer, which already has effectively no recoil. I just think that this complements a lot of weapons very well, just by making them easier to handle. Again, HMG is a fantastic weapon. I've recently fell in love with that gun. Next up we have Engineering Kit, which gives you the same recoil reduction and also gives you 2 extra throwables. I think Engineering Kit has sort of a middle-of-the-road status. Having 4 grenades usually, or you spawn with 2, but you can resupply extremely easily, is generally enough, especially on the bot front. You generally won't find more than 4 fabricators, and given that a lot of support weapons can help deal with them, they're not that useful there. Where I think Engineering Kit earns its niche, though, is with thermite grenades. As you naturally only have 3 thermite grenades, you get up to 5 of them, which is huge. making that just instead of a 50% increase, it's up to a 66% increase. And thermite grenades are really good. If you just whip that at the stomach of a bile titan, there's a good chance that thing's it's cooked. Or any armor you throw it at, it's also you don't have to be very accurate on fabricators, stuff like that. Just throw a thermite at it; it'll destroy it. If you really enjoy thermite grenades, I think you'll get a lot of mileage out of engineering kit. Otherwise, I'd say it's fairly middle of the road, which I think will earn it probably a low B tier. Next, we have medkit. Medkit is certainly a solid one. This is it's, of course, the main thing is 2 extra syringes, stims, which is very good, obviously, because stims are so important. Though, aside from that, it just gives you slightly increased stim duration, which is, of course, very good. And it's sort of just making you into, well, a medic. Obviously, this is mainly seen on the medic armors. Being able to carry more stims means you're tougher to kill, and your teammates are more easily repaired by your own stims. And given the increased duration, it means if you need to get somewhere, you can stim and you'll be able to sprint for a good bit longer, which is very useful. I will say, though, probably not a passive I use very often, but I can acknowledge that medkit is very good, and I think I'm going to give it probably a lower A tier, mainly just because having more stims isn't the end of the world. I'm going to bump it down. I'll be at the top of B tier. Mainly just because I find myself, you should always be calling in resupplies just so they're all over the map, which means they'll pretty much always have stims. And there's certain boosters like experimental infusion that effectively replicates the increased stim duration, which just, in general, I think medkit is fairly middle of the road, but good if you're really struggling or if you're facing, you constantly find yourself with broken limbs or a hemorrhaging chest. Being able to just medkit more frequently is very good, though also, of course, there is the sort of classic get good, just don't get in those situations and you won't be burning through your stims very often. Next, we have Democracy Protects, and I think a lot of people like Democracy Protects, but personally I don't. I just think it's kind of a pointless passive. It's on mainly medium armors. I think it's on a few heavies as well. But what it does is you're immune to bleeding, which means if your chest gets broken effectively, you don't take passive damage, and you have a coin flip chance to survive lethal damage. So this is just kind of like the gambler's kit, because in theory you could technically never die. Is that going to happen? No. So while this does... The reason I'm not a big fan of it is that there's just generally other things that that do the same job more effectively. Like, if I get hit with a Scout Strider rocket while wearing Democracy Protects, there's a chance that I will survive it. Or I could just wear fortified armor and I will survive it. Or I could run extra padding, which makes me a lot tougher in general, so I won't be in those situations very often. And ignoring hemorrhaging is nice, but I generally only find that my chest gets hemorrhaged when I'm getting swarmed by berserkers or I'm getting run over by a charger, in which case, yes, ignoring that's very nice, but unless I have a jump pack, I'm probably going to get chopped to pieces anyways or run over by a charger, which just kind of renders it pointless. I think it may have more use on perhaps the Illuminate front, but I say that a lot of the Illuminate weapons are continuous fire, so even if you do negate one of those hits of damage, the next one is probably going to kill you anyways. I don't particularly like Democracy Protects. I'll give it a C tier just because I can tell that, hey, if you're a lucky guy, if you always win the slots, then yes, Democracy Protects is the best passive in the game because you cannot die. Next we have Servo Assisted, which Servo Assisted is... the main effect is, of course, increases throwing range by 30%, which is fairly standard. I think it's fairly good as well. Your natural throwing range, if you will, I believe maxes out at around 50 meters, so adding 30% onto that brings you up to, around, 75? Something like that? No, a little less than that, like 65 or 70, I believe it is. Servo Assisted tends to be on medium armors, which I have no problem with, and you also do take less limb damage, which is handy, because I do find myself getting my arms and legs broken more often than I say get my chest hemorrhaged from Democracy Protects protection. And I think that that's an okay ability, and the main thing you're buying this for is just getting those extra range. It makes it a little easier for you to call in your 500 kg bombs, your orbital lasers onto your big targets without having to get as close, which is certainly nice. But the effect can kind of be replicated through certain stratagems, i.e. the jump pack comes to mind. Of course, if you're flying through the air, you can just whip something much further. Of course, if you stack the two, I'm sure you can throw these things, 100 meters or something like that. But aside from that, I find it to just be, fairly middle of the road. If you're really struggling to get your grenades and things on target, then I'm sure it could be very helpful. But in my opinion, it's fairly just middle of the road. Next, we have Electrical Conduit, which reduces electrical damage by, 95%, which is not that useful on two of the fronts, and I'd say moderately useful on the other. So for bots, there's no electrical damage there. Bugs, no electrical damage there. The Illuminate have a little bit of electrical damage. Of course, they're Tesla towers. The Watchers and Harvesters do have very close range arc attacks. And it does, of course, if you have someone who loves to use the arc thrower and is as blind as a bat, this could definitely be useful. But I just think it's too niche. It's also one of the few armors that only provides one benefit. It only gives you the electrical resistance. It doesn't give you, say, chance to reflect melee damage. I'm just throwing ideas out there, which I think makes Electrical Conduit very, very mediocre. Of course, being able to walk through Tesla towers is very nice, as they can be extremely frustrating, but also you can just crawl through them. You can hit them with an explosive, which will generally destroy them. And overall, I just think Electrical Conduit's not very good. It's just very, very niche. Unless you guys are running full arc throwers and are all standing next to each other, or blitzers, for example, I see no reason to ever bring this. It's just a very, very niche benefit. Next we have Peak Physique, which is, on the other hand, I think a pretty solid ability. Obviously, the sort of hallmark effect of this is you do a lot more damage. With melee, you do double the damage. Of course, this doesn't make you into, Rocky. Don't try and go box a Devastator. That's not going to go very well. I'd say this is almost essential if you're running the new melee weapons, just because then they're a lot more effective, obviously, because they're already significantly more effective, but this is still handy, especially if you like to play stealthy, which this does, obviously replaces Scout, which is the easiest way to play stealth, but with Peak Physique, of course, you walk up behind a bot that's on a turret, you can just whip them in the back of the head, and then maybe one more hit and they're dead, instead of having to whip them 4 times or whatever it is normally. But the other benefit is better weapon handling, which is pretty good, and it's just something that's very weapon by weapon. If you're using something like the Dominator, the Eruptor, or the HMG, as I mentioned earlier, really any of the support weapons, you'll just feel that they're a lot more nimble when you're aiming down sights, and even when you're just whipping around in general. So I think Peak Physique is actually pretty good. My friend who uses the HMG a lot uses Peak Physique quite frequently. We really like to bring those against the Illuminate. The HMG just kind of tears up everything on the Illuminate front, so Peak Physique, very useful. Makes your panic melees a little bit better when both your primary and secondary are out of ammo. You can just whip that bug in the face, or whip that bot, or whatever it may be in the face, but don't go too insane. You're not, you're not an assault intercessor charging into battle. You are still a Helldiver. So I quite like this one. I'm going to give it an A. Just very good for specific circumstances. Maybe I'll knock it down to a B or the very bottom of A. I do like that it's a constantly on thing. It adds things that you can't do normally, so I'm going to keep it an A. Next we have Inflammable. This is, unsurprisingly, to do with fire. This one gives you 75% fire resistance, which is certainly solid. I do find that even with that, fires will kill you very fast. Once you catch fire, you will still burn very quickly. So this gives you a little bit more reprieve from that. very useful if you're running a fire squadron, and I think that does give it a place because I find fire loadouts to be extremely effective on the bug and the illuminate front. The fire just, for some reason, annihilates everything on the illuminate front. It's really funny. And though it does give you some added survivability against things like Hulk Scorchers, I wouldn't rely on that, because if a Scorcher's close enough to use its flamethrower, even if you take less damage from that, you're probably going to get slapped with the melee, which is still, I believe, an instant kill. I don't think there's anything that can let you survive that. This is mainly useful if you are fighting... if you're just running a full fire loadout and you don't want to set yourself on fire as easily. But I'd say it's probably a B tier at best, probably lower B tier as well. Certainly useful if you're far more useful than electrical conduit, just because you're much more likely for your friend to be a pyromaniac than an electromaniac. So being able to not worry about getting set on fire by that is very nice. Very useful, but just fairly niche, and it also only gives one benefit. If this had a secondary benefit, I would knock it way down. Like, if this made you immune to catching fire, then Inflammable would jump up probably a tier, or maybe even 2. That would make it insanely good. Next we have Advanced Filtration, which... Advanced Filtration might be the single worst passive in the game. So it gives you 80% damage resistance to gas, but the problem is, this is even like Electrical Conduit, where most enemies don't use it, but some do. There's no passive... like enemies that use gas damage, as far as I know. I do play on Helldive and Super Helldive, so there's no enemies that aren't spawning. Bile Spewers, Bile Titans, they don't inflict gas damage. I can't think, and obviously none of the bots use gas damage, and the Illuminate use electrical and energy damage. I really see no reason to ever use this. This doesn't even have niche uses. Like, Electrical Conduit has its uses against Tesla towers for the Illuminate. Advanced Filtration just does nothing. Not only are most of the gas items pretty bad, the Gas Spewer is bad, the Gas Guard Dog is bad, the Orbital Gas Strike, I'll admit, has some uses because it can destroy structures, but even then you probably shouldn't be hanging around inside of that anyways. I see no purpose in using this. And gas doesn't even have the same effect of electrical and fire. Electrical, it changes between targets, so even if you're in the vicinity, you might get zapped by a friend using a blitzer or an arc thrower. Or fire sets the ground on fire, obviously, and enemies that are on fire, if they hit you, can't set you on fire. But gas doesn't linger, unless it's a gas strike or a gas strike from a artillery. And it doesn't chain, so I see no purpose in using this. It doesn't even give you that much protection from friendlies unless they're trolling and just spawning with a gas thrower and just constantly dousing you with it, which in that case just leave that party. Obviously, they're griefing. Regardless, I think Advanced Filtration, I completely forgot about this passive, is easily the worst in the game. Next we have Unflinching. You see this on the Truth Enforcers armor, mainly, which is medium and light armor. But this is a pretty interesting passive. So what it does is you don't flinch. Funnily enough, unflinching means you don't flinch. It's not entirely that simple. You just reduce flinching to like 90% reduction, which makes it a lot easier to keep your gun on target. Though it does also reduce camera shake and a few of the Helldiver audio cues, if I'm not mistaken. So using this, you have to be careful, because even though, yes, you'll stay on target a lot, you'll be more lethal, it can be a little hard to tell when you're taking damage, because your screen won't be shaking. So just, if you're going to use this, make sure you're very cognizant of your health, which isn't the hardest to do, but even the health indicators, like your screen turning red and stuff like that, they happen when you just take a little bit of damage, so you can't just rely on those. Regardless, though, I think Unflinching is a very solid B tier. If you're using something that's very unwieldy, the Adjudicator, funnily enough, heavy machine gun, stuff like that, that's very hard to whip around. This does help in making it easier to keep it on target. I'd say it's better with long-range weapons, so you can set up and just, it's very hard for you to get hit by something and stumble off target and then reposition. I think it's a B tier. Probably the bottom of B tier, though. And next we have Siege Ready, the most recent armor passive from Urban Champions. Is that the name of it? It's the Siege Omen of Tyranny. This gives you one extra magazine on most weapons. It's 20%, I think, 25. 20% more. Oh my god, I'm really struggling to talk here. So weapons with 5 loads, you get 1 more. 6 get 2 loads, so on and so forth. The tube-fed weapons, they just get more ammo related to things. So from there, you also reload faster. That was really hard to get out of my mouth. I don't know why. But this is pretty good, in my opinion. It's especially good on weapons that have long reloads. Tenderizer particularly likes it. Machine gun, HMG, and regular SMG particularly like it. Though I think that might actually be a bug. If I'm not mistaken, that might be a bug. So aside from that, just useful, because a lot of good primaries have quite long reloads. Not all of them. But as I mentioned, Tenderizer particularly appreciates it. But I'd say it's fairly middle of the road. Only use it if you're really struggling with using only long reload weapons. And I think this thing is bugged at the moment, actually, so that probably is going to get patched. We're going to put that probably in like B tier, probably up with Engineering Kit, where I think it's just kind of, with how easy it is to constantly resupply, I don't see the benefit outside of extremely sluggish primaries like the Eruptor or the Tenderizer. And even then with the Tenderizer, I say that, but I use the Tenderizer pretty much all the time and never run siege armor, so clearly it must not be that much of a problem. Maybe this is a little high, but I'm being preliminary, and also this does affect multiple weapons right now when I think it's bugged, regardless. There is one more in this that we need to get. Let me pause and grab it really quick. Okay, we're back. So I know this looks like the inflammable icon, but this is not inflammable. This is acclimated, which is sort of an amalgamation of the different resistance armors, which instead of giving you 95, 80, and 75 respectively, gives you 50% to each. And personally, I don't really think this is that good of a passive either. It doesn't give you enough resistance to make any of these things significant. Well, it does make them significantly less lethal. It's not a huge amount. Like with Electrical Conduit, I admit you can just waltz through Tesla towers and take probably about 30 to 50% of your health. But that's with 95% damage reduction. So if you slash that significantly down to 50, you're probably looking at barely surviving if you are surviving. As I mentioned, gas resistance I think is the most moot thing in the game. Almost no one uses gas weapons, and no enemies use gas weapons, so I really don't see a purpose in this. Maybe if the automatons get an update where they get, like, the Jet Brigade, maybe they get the Gas Brigade, which is like hulks, tanks equipped with gas throwers, then maybe. Even still, 50% fire damage resistance isn't going to help you either. And it's not enough to make it to the point where you have a significantly longer time to dive, to get out of fire. I think Acclimated is very bad. It is a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none approach, which just doesn't really work. It's a very, very flimsy durability buff, and also it's not even on any armors that make you particularly tough. This is from the Helldivers 2 crossover, or not Helldivers 2 crossover, Killzone 3 crossover, so it's on a scout armor and a medium armor, which don't have top-of-their-class armor ratings, may I add. So overall, I think this is just another moot point. I think it's quite a mediocre passive, and I think they should have done something different. Maybe just give this unflinching. I don't know. I haven't played Killzone, so I want to know. Anyways, that wraps up my thoughts. Let me know what you thought down below. Did I rate anything too high, anything too low? Do you, for some reason, like Advanced Filtration? I will admit, Advanced Filtration has some cool armors. Wish we could swap passives around. Please, Arrowhead, let me swap passives around. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.